what's the process? What's your writing process? Maybe if you can talk about that a bit.
See, I think I've gone through different schools of thought, right? Like I was in advertising where it was very consumer led. It was like, what is happening? Just like, it's a very different kind of, very difficult. I have immense respect for that craft because it's very difficult. It's not easy to do at all. And so I did that for a long time. And then I did comedy writing. I think this clash of culture, right? Like being so disciplined in your writing and writing for someone, and then you come to comedy writing, which is just like, like Tanmay keeps saying, it's pursuing truth, right? Comedy is what at the end of it, it's like talking truth, and uncomfortable truths is makes things funny. So I think at AIB, sitting with the four of them and learning to think, learning to write comedy from probably the four best writers in the country was just like it. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I learned a lot from there. And then I already had discipline of writing, which advertising had taught me. So I had to unlearn a lot of things from advertising, but it had set a strong base in terms of writing discipline. And then I understood and learned a lot of thinking from working with the team at AIB, and writing on air with AIB was also was a great experience. I mean, I was not the big writer there. I was probably like the small writer. The On Air with AIB writing team is probably one of the most insane writing teams in India ever. So Zakir, Abhishek Upamanyu, like, you had all these guys in the room and the four AIB people, Karunesh Talwar, like this is like a crazy list of people who wrote On Air with AIB, and I was just there observing these guys. So trying to see how they crack a thought, trying to see how they arrive at truth, trying to see how they flip a line, trying to see how they sort of attempt a joke, an angle of a joke. I was just like it was a great learning experience for me. So what happened is, so when I started writing for publications, I just use the skills I sort of learned at AIB and the discipline that I learned in advertising. And that really helped me sort of try and like crack that market, because writing content at AIB is like, what goes viral. You learn that virality is a science almost. It is not fluke. You can't go viral by fluke.
So today it's our 9th episode with Devaya Bopanna. Let me quickly introduce Devaya. So Devaya is a Mumbai-based writer who, in his words, says that he writes bad jokes for non-living things, using non-living things. He called himself as a former comedy writer, former advertising guy, former engineering graduate, and so many things former. He enjoys writing satire and opinion pieces on First Post, The Print, Array, BuzzFeed, The Hindu Business Line, and Medium. And trust me when I say this, it's going to be a fun conversation, because a few of his articles on Medium are titled as "Why You Are As Problematic as Indian Matchmaking," "Why Banning TikTok Should Bother Us But Our Elitism Ensure It Won't," "Why We Should Replace the Phase New Normal as With Fucked Up." So it's going to be super fun conversation with Devaya. We are going to explore about the world of writing and what does it take to become a satirist and a creative content writer. He call himself a social media non-influencer, and he is currently the co-founder at All Things Small, which is a creative studio. He has been also the former head writer at All India Bakchod, and he's worked very closely with the teams who brought to you On Air with AIB, Honest Out Parties, Demonetization Circus, Honest Engineering Placements. And in words of Devaya, in words of overachiever Gokhale, if I go and tell all these things to Devaya, he would react by saying, "Are nahi yaar." So welcome Devaya to the live stream, CTC Live, and I'm sure it's going to be a super fun conversation. Hi Devaya, how are you? Welcome to CTC.
Hey Dilwaz, I'm very good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good too.
Nice.
So before I jump into the serious conversation, let me ask you, and let me begin the conversation by asking you, why do you call yourself a social media non-influencer?
See, I just think that being an influencer is an overestimation of the power or the clout you have. It is just absolute nonsense. Like you can't change behavior, you can't change anything, even if you have 1 million followers online. So I think people who call themselves social media influencers are just overestimating their ability to reach out and create change and influence people, which is not going to happen.
Okay.
I think the best of religions have tried to influence people and failed. So I don't think your Instagram following is going to do anything at all.
You have also, the most important part about you and what I've read about you, you have been a industrial engineering student, right? Turned a writer, and you have had almost like a decade-long experience now with a successful association with likes of Ogilvy and AIB and likes of those, right? So, when we talk about engineering, a lot of, there's a very famous quote which says that you first do engineering and then you explore what you want to do. So was that the case with you, or how come you became a writer? What was the journey? Give us a brief about that.
See, I think the education system in Bangalore, where I grew up, is very simple. All right, so you just automatically you become an engineer. There is no, you just it's part of your life. You just that is the course that you're set upon. You just automatically become an engineer. Even if you don't want to, you just like get sucked into an engineering college and you'll get thrown out with an engineering degree. So I think that's pretty much what happened to me as well. So I was just good at going to tuitions and going through old question papers to guess what is going to come this year, and it just worked out. And then I ended up in an engineering college because marks were good, and they had this whole CET ranking thing that that worked out in my favor. And then I got a college close to my house, which was a very good college, and it had, I think I only qualified for industrial engineering. Like all the cool subjects like mechanical and everything went. And I had a choice. Either I want to study the cool subject in a college a little far away, or go to anything in a college that is good near my house. So I picked the latter. And that is how I ended up becoming an industrial engineer, actually.
Okay. Yeah. So can you tell us what industrial engineering is all about? Hota kya hai ye?
I mean, if I had known Dilnawaz, I would be making a lot more money. And I would, be like my friends. I would be abroad consulting for some big firm. So as far as I went to class, from what I remember, industrial engineering is just like you have to pass 35 marks out of your 100. And I think you become an industrial engineer. That is as much as I know about industrial engineering.
Okay. How did the writing happen? So how come you went into Ogilvy? Because I think post-engineering, it's difficult because a lot of guys who get into writing come from some sort of a literature or art background, right? So for an engineer, how come the writing happened?
I think, when people ask me this, they're like, oh, okay, you just gave up engineering and then you branched out into this little risky career called writing. But my question is, I never had a career in engineering in the first place because I was so bad at it. It's not like it's not like Narayan Murthy was on the call and he's like, no, Deva, you have to join Infosys, man, a company is going to collapse. And then I say like, hey, Narayan, very sorry, I have to pursue my passion. Yeah, that is a good story. And that requires a certain amount of guts. But but I think the reality is that I didn't have anything else I could do. So, so there was not much of a choice because my marks were pretty bad. And I don't think I even qualified for placements. So I was just, I just finished my engineering, and writing is something, I think it's very common in engineering colleges because a lot of people in India get into engineering colleges just because they can crack the exam, not because they're interested in it. And also, we are the kids that grew up in the 90s, and we sort of saw how a good job can change your lifestyle, right? Like, in the 90s, it was mostly public sector. Our parents didn't have huge salaries. You were either super rich or you were middle class, right? And not poor, but you were just middle class. A lot of middle class people where you didn't go on foreign holidays, you didn't go out to eat every day, you didn't have a certain amount of lifestyle. And that was true to most Indians, right? That grew up in that era. And I think we started seeing change when, our close family or close friend circle, our neighbors, they started doing well financially was because of their engineering degree. They would join a software company and suddenly you see their lifestyle sort of blow up, and these are people you grew up with, you knew, and suddenly, they're going to the US and they're buying branded stuff, they're buying a car, they're buying a better bike, and then you're like, oh, you're just attributing that whole success to the amount of money they're making because it was the new economy, right? So most of us grew up at least I grew up in the 90s. So for me, seeing that change for all of us, this is a certificate that can sort of take you out of your normal life and give you a better lifestyle, right? So it was not so much about happiness. So I think most of us got into engineering because of that, because we saw that your life could change with this degree in the early 2000s. And that's exactly the reason why even like a lot of people get in, and then they realize once they get into college that, hey, you know, this is not my scene. Some people straight away say this is not my scene and quit. Some people like me will be like, okay, let me just figure, you know, something out and then see what to do. Some people I know are still in engineering and they're not happy with it. All right. So it's when you want to bail out. So what happens is you have a lot of extraordinarily smart people in engineering colleges who are there because their marks are good, but they are very good human minds. And they would kill it in any other. Like if they were in arts college, they would be killing it. If they were in commerce,
absolutely.
So you have this assortment of individuals who are not so happy with their engineering life in college about doing engineering, so they're disillusioned, but they're extremely sharp, brilliant, and you have amazing conversations with people like that. You make friends with them, and it's a very like a different approach to conventional arts and creativity, right? So I don't come from like writing. Like grammar is not my strength. I am not well read like most writers. I am not like I have not gone through classical literature. I have not read philosophy like most writers would. But I think that's also my strength, right? Because it's a very different approach to problems and problem solving in the creative world, which is because of your lateral entry into creativity through engineering. So your friend circle is different. They're very objective. So you meet the smartest bunch of people who are very objective, who are not biased towards creativity, and then they just end up being creative.
Maybe would you say this because the way engineering is taught, forget the content part, the way it's taught and the kind of regressive exercise it is, it makes you a better professional? Do you think it is that forget about the marks, forget about the way it's done? What's your opinion on that?
I think this is I think if you step backwards, firstly, do most of us want to do engineering? All right. So I think that is the first question. Now, if you want to do engineering and then get into engineering college, like I have a couple of my friends who are doing insane stuff in engineering. Like they've got this motorcycle company, one of the most promising up and coming motorcycle company called Ultraviolet. This is Narayan and Neeraj. They're fantastic engineers. They're building like a crazy product for the future. And I know for a fact, like Narayan and Neeraj, I mean, I don't think they did very well into them. They never topped their class. All right. So I think if you want to do engineering and then you go into an engineering college in India, it is disappointing. All right. I can tell you that because it is outdated the way I mean, at least it was between 2004 and 2008. I'm talking during that time frame. It is definitely outdated. You are learning stuff which I'm guessing you wouldn't be like applying into your normal engineering job. I mean, the testimony to this is the fact that even if you're hired by a software company or whoever, they have to put you into 6 months of training before, starting you off with a job. I think that is great testament to like how relevant our engineering degree is. Like you literally spend 4 years to do something, and then they have to train you for 6 more months to actually do it. So I think definitely, I don't think the course is structured well. I think that also disillusions a lot of people who want to do it.
तो ये सवाल कभी आया किसी की तरफ से या ये स्टेटमेंट आया once you became a writer कि एक सीट खराब कर दी?
I mean, a lot of people tell me that, that I kind of like ruined a seat, because also I got like, I think a government aided merit seat. So it's not like my dad paid for it. So I mean, I do think about it at times. And honestly, I have no answer for that because there are pros and cons. I know if I hadn't taken up that seat, somebody more deserving, who's more interested, could have taken up that seat. But I think the problem why it happened in the first place is a deeper problem. So I don't think I should be blamed for it. Like if the government supported interests that are in the area of arts and creative pursuit, and they built great colleges and institutions for that, and gave people like me and others a chance to go explore, learn, and provide a certain amount of, if they had grants when you came out of college, you can make your movies, you can do this, like how they have in Europe, you have a lot of grants over there. If all those things were there, then I can say, yeah, I might have ruined a seat because I had an option. The truth of the matter is I didn't have an option.
So what was the first writing gig that you landed, and how did that happen?
So I think, so this is what happened actually, after my second PU, that's what you call 12th standard in Bangalore. The government and the colleges went, went head to head to the court, there was some big mistake. All right, there was this common entrance test. So the government sued the college, or the college sued the government. I don't know what happened, but I remember I got a lot of holidays, so I was happy.
Oh.
And the colleges didn't start till I think about September or October. So there was a lot of time, like 4 or 5 months at home. And I think, quite frankly, my father got very irritated with me being at home. All right, because must have been very annoying. So he's like, look, you have to go do something. So then he rang up his friend in advertising and said, like, hey, he told me that, okay, you have an interest in writing and all these things. So why don't you just, go intern somewhere? And this, thankfully, again, is a privilege because I come from the city. So, and a cosmopolitan city like Bangalore, where I have access to these things, right? So then I went and interned in this agency, a very big agency called JWT, for 2 months as a 17-year-old. And that experience, so I went there as an intern and I worked on some of the projects. So I didn't contribute in any way, because I was just 17 and I was extremely bad at what I was doing. But I think, there is where I first, tried to write stuff. And that was my first window into like the creative communications field.
I think also what you have added is a very important, relevant topic, of course. But I want to definitely talk about that as well. It is relevance of internships, because again, if you go to tier 23 rather, the concept of internship is very alien, and it's very it's a gray area. There's a huge debate between whether it should be paid, unpaid. So give us broad context. What's your opinion? Where do you put this internship thing? What's your take on that?
I think internships are extremely important. I think it's perhaps more important than attending college, because you educate yourself with the ground realities of situation, right? You're seeing real-time problem solving, and even if you're not solving the problem, seeing someone else solve the problem, you learn a lot more than going to classrooms and learning something of a book that was published in 1984. So I think internships are extremely important. Now this is the truth, right? It's a very privileged thing if you are in the cities where you can intern. So automatically I have a head start over most people who are in tier 2 towns and tier 3 towns. Which is sad, which is going to limit growth in those places, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it should be made mandatory. I think the onus should be on companies. The owners can't be on students, because they're 16, 17. How do you expect them to move out of their towns and come to a city, live by themselves, and attend this office you're not even a major, you're still a minor in life. So I think the onus should be on companies, right? Onus should be on industries where they have to make it compulsory for big companies to make sure they hire a certain set amount of interns from from places that are outside. They basically have a mix of interns in their offices at all points in time. I think that should be made. And as far as paid or unpaid, it has to be paid. It definitely has to be paid, because it is a job and you're making people work, and you might even use their ideas if someone cracks something, right? And so I think it has to be mandated. Like, companies have to go out and get a certain amount of interns from a variety of places and pay them a stipend, even their living expenses, because you're being in a small town is hard enough already for you to sort of get access to certain things, and you can't expect someone to pay the price for it, right? You have to, either the government pays for it, or the companies pay for it, which they can sort of reclaim in taxes. There needs to be some system that needs to be sort of put in place.
Can you quickly tell us how's been your journey from being an intern into that particular creative agency to then co-founding All Things Small? Quickly take us through the journey. What's been it like?
So basically, after my college, I like I said, I didn't have any placement. So then I knew someone. I'd done 2 internships. So I finished that internship. Then after second year in college, I went and interned in another ad agency. And then someone who I interned under in that ad agency had moved to Ogilvy. So that kind of made me have a connect at Ogilvy. So then I wrote to that person, and he was very kind. His name is Sundar Mutanna. So Sundar was very kind to sort of give me a chance to intern at Ogilvy, where I really didn't study advertising at all. I was an engineering student. So then I went to Ogilvy, intern for 2 months, and it was the time when Lehman Brothers collapsed. So there was the economy collapsed, and they had frozen on hiring. So I think I worked for a long time for Ogilvy without getting paid. And and I just told myself, this is college, this is my investment, so let it go. It's cool. So again, which is a privilege, right? I don't think anyone else from a background who had to start earning would not be able to do that. So so if I wasn't that lucky, I probably would have quit, and I would have to have taken up something else for money. So so I got into Ogilvy. I was in Ogilvy for 3 years. Then I moved to. So I was working under this boss. His name is Vipul Thakkar, like an amazing creative director, and he was heading a bunch of agencies through his career. So then he moved to DDB. So I followed him there. I worked in DDB, and then that was about 5 years in advertising in Bangalore. And I realized that after a point, the work was getting the same, right? Because the clients are pretty much the same, the geography is the same. So not doing cool work. And also there is this whole thing about Bombay, because the entertainment capital of India. Come to think about it, it's the most irrational thing you can ever think of. You want to move to a city that pays you, like which is overcrowded, which is where you live in a smaller home and highly competitive. So, and you don't get enough. So then I moved to Bombay because I thought like I needed to sort of get out of this inertia of Bangalore. And then I moved to Bombay, where I moved into an advertising agency in Bombay, where it went very bad. Like I didn't like the work I was doing. I didn't like the people I was working with. And then I moved to this agency called Lowlantas, a very big agency. So I was there. It was a very nice, cushy job. And then it was 2015, and that's when AIB happened. AIB basically, the roast had just come up and they had blown up, and then they were looking to expand. They were just 4 or 5 people then. They were like looking to expand into a team, set up something. So I got approached for that job. That job happened. And I was at AIB for till 2018, till when we had to close operations. And then I was freelancing for a while after that. And then all things small, I decided to sort of collaborate with a bunch of friends and start this company.
Do you think it is important to get that first big thing so that everybody then starts going and to like a Ogilvy and Leo Burnett and that likes of those, or is it or you need to learn first, or kind of have a great boss and great learning? How do you analyze? What's your perspective on that? Number one. Number two, how important do you think is the city for a creative professional? These are the 2 questions I would like to know the answer for them first, right?
So I think the first thing, how important is the city? Right now, it is not. All right. In 2008, it was very important. It was very important because the industry didn't exist in so many places, right? The industry just existed in like your 3 metropolitan cities, not even so much, I don't think, in Calcutta. So what happens is, at that point, your geography is very important, and where you get your job is also very important. But I always look at so when people ask me like where to start, I just always say that there are 3 factors. First is boss. All right, you get a great creative in the creative field. It's all about mentorship. You learn most from your first 2 bosses. So boss, then the kind of brands you're working on, and then the money that you're getting paid. So I think these are the 3 filters that I generally keep. But right now in 2020, I don't think where you work is important, because if you are good, you will get noticed. Because of the internet, right? Like you will, like if you are in the field of writing and creating, you can't, there can't be an excuse that your work is not getting published. You have the whole internet to publish your work.
Right.
And it's not and you can go viral sitting from anywhere in the world, right? It's not like you have to be in Bombay for your work to go viral. So I think right now is all about just publishing whatever you're doing. And if you are good enough, I think you will get noticed and picked up. But I still think it is kind of unfairly skewed to people in cities, because there's always this thing called socializing that you can do. You will meet someone who will know someone who will meet someone and who will help you through life. So I think that aspect is missing if you're not not in cities. But I think right now that can be slightly bypassed because of online, the promise of online virality for good content. I mean, of course, that this answer is just from a writing point of view. But to be very honest, say if you're a costume designer, all right, you can't go viral sitting in Kota. You have to go to Bombay. If you are in other aspects in other creative fields, you have to sort of move to a city to sort of make it, right. You can't. The industry doesn't exist over there. So I'm answering clearly from a writing and a content point of view.
How important is the networking factor over the writing skill part, or do you think it will come naturally to you if you spend like 8 good years into the industry? What's your take on that?
I think the non-negotiable here is the work. Okay, so your work has to be good. Like, you know, it has to have like your work has to be good. Like everything else you can negotiate with, all right. But if I don't think I mean, so I think first your work has to be good, and then if you are 10 years in the industry, you automatically are there for a while. So you meet people and you'll know people. You will. And they will sort of move and they will go to different companies and they'll be working there. So connections are established. So it becomes easier. But no one is going to approach you if your work is bad. Because if someone is giving you work, it is their work also is on the line because they have to get something done. So they will not give you work if your work is bad because their reputation is on the line as well, right? So the work is the most important.
What are the critical skill sets people need to, number one, be a writer? And what are the upcoming areas in terms of skill sets that people need to now start looking at if they have to pursue this kind of a career path?
So I think there are many forms of writing which require like slightly differentiated skill sets. But I think for me, the most basic and the one that you need to have the most if you're a writer is the ability to think. Like I think you know, a lot of people skip that part. That is the most basic part. Like, you know, like grammar is the last thing that you need to be a writer, right? Like rules of the English language is the last thing you need to have to be a writer, at least according to me. I mean, softwares are getting better now, so they will catch your mistake, right? So it's not like you need to know. I mean, I honestly don't know. Like I make so many mistakes while writing, and it doesn't bother me at all because the most important thing is the thought. If your thought resonates with people, the writing will just automatically, like it's writing. The act of writing is just a sort of a medium to communicate. It is just like talking, but I think thought is the most important thing. So I think to develop thought is a very critical factor in wanting to be a writer. Like, and you have to actively develop your thoughts. You have to actively read things that you don't generally read. You have to have curiosity. You have to have interest in picking up like articles. Like I read a lot of articles online. I read a lot of tweets online. I read things that are not my core areas of interest. I try to meet interesting people all the time. I always seek out people who are doing something different, and I will try and go and have a meal with them and talk to them to understand what they're doing. So I think just like collecting, it's a collection of experiences, right? Your thoughts are a collection of experiences. So if you have like varied and good experiences and bad experiences, your thoughts will also be diverse. So and your thoughts are your reservoir that you go into to solve a problem or to sort of write anything. So I think an access to thoughts, and you have to work on your thoughts every day is what I feel. And that's what I actively do. I read like all news articles every day. I read what's happening on Twitter every day. I read what's happening on Facebook every day. I read what Donald Trump is saying every day. I watch a lot of stuff. I just waste time on YouTube, but I don't call it time wasting because I think I'm just like, I just watch random videos on YouTube. So I think thought is the most important thing when it comes to writing. And it doesn't always have to be academic in nature, right? Like, I mean, I follow Bollywood paparazzis and I know what Viral Bhayani is putting up. I know what Manav Minglani is putting up. I read their captions. I read their comments, what comments they're getting to their posts that they're uploading. So that tries and that gives you an understanding of what people think of these things and how people are invested into paparazzi culture. What are their thoughts on paparazzi culture? What is paparazzi culture? What is right? What is wrong? So I think you just and maybe this sort of trying exploration of thought on paparazzi culture, you might sort of use that knowledge to solve something else later or to write something else later when the time comes. So you don't know when you're going to use it, but I just make sure I am just constantly consuming everything.
And is there a skill set also people need to learn, like maybe do an online course in copywriting or what else? What are the other things people? So one, of course, you said consumer of content, be digital aware, read a lot, consume content, learn. Other than that, what are the critical areas?
I think I mean, you can do a course, but I think you have to figure out who you're doing the course with. Like, if the person you're doing the course with is good, and you respect that person's work, then for sure you have to do a course. It just course is a hack for you to make sure you know when you're doing a mistake, right? Like, because I think that is most of the time you're making a mistake and you don't even know it. Like, I think your course and experience sort of tells you that, hey, this is wrong, don't spend too much time on this. So I think that sort of makes you more efficient. So that you can learn through experience or through experienced people. So that kind of helps, but I think it's your own exploration at the end of the day.
Okay. So, but this brings me to your style of writing. I think the way you write, which is publicly you write, and as I told you behind the stage that I've been following your work almost like from 4 or 5 years. You have a very, very critical satirist style of writing, right? So, what's been the kind of affection with this style of writing? Why do you do it, or does it come naturally to you? What's the process? What's your writing process? Maybe if you can talk about that a bit.
See, I think I've gone through different schools of thought, right? Like, I was in advertising where it was very consumer led. It was like, what is happening? Just like, it's a very different kind of, it's very difficult. I have immense respect for that craft because it's very difficult. It's not easy to do at all. And so I did that for a long time. And then I did comedy writing. I think this clash of culture, right? Like being so disciplined in your writing and writing for someone, and then you come to comedy writing, which is just like, like Tanmay keeps saying, it's pursuing truth, right? Comedy is what at the end of it, it's like talking truth, and uncomfortable truths is makes things funny. So I think at AIB, sitting with the four of them and learning to think, like learning to write comedy from probably the 4 best writers in the country was just like it. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I learned a lot from there. And then I already had discipline of writing, which advertising had taught me. So I had to unlearn a lot of things from advertising, but it had set a strong base in terms of writing discipline. And then I understood and learned a lot of thinking from working with the team at AIB, and writing on air with AIB was also was a great experience. I mean, I was not the big writer there. I was probably like the small writer. The on air with AIB writing team is probably one of the most insane writing teams in India ever. So Zakir, Abhishek Upamanyu, like, you had all these guys in the room and the 4 AIB people, Karunesh Talwar, like this is like a crazy list of people who wrote on air with AIB, and I was just there observing these guys. So trying to see how they crack a thought, trying to see how they arrive at truth, trying to see how they flip a line, trying to see how they sort of attempt a joke, an angle of a joke. I was just like it was a great learning experience for me. So what happened is, so when I started writing for publications, I just use the skills I sort of learned at AIB and the discipline that I learned in advertising, and that really helped me sort of try and like crack that market, because writing content at AIB is like, what goes viral. You learn that virality is a science almost. It is not fluke. You can't go viral by fluke.
So tell us how to go viral on the internet. Tell us the formula.
There is, see, I think it's very simple, right? Like, there are so many things. Like one is, if someone is saying, if someone is against someone, if someone is saying this person is bad, okay, for one full day, 2 days later you write an article why this person is actually good, it will go viral. Right? It's like, it's a contrarian opinion, so it will go viral. So there are many of these things, like, write about relative things, it will go viral. You write something very topical, it will go viral. At the end of the day, I think you need to write the truth. Now, because sometimes what happens is when the whole internet is talking about something, they all miss the truth. And it is crazy how everyone misses the truth. It's sometimes the most basic truth is not spoken. And I think just writing that is enough, and you'll go viral.
So isn't truth a perception, especially in the world today?
See, it's like how you look at the truth, right? So I think what happens is people just get so consumed by so much information around, and they just start like, they rant at all the wrong things, and then you just tell them, hey, wait, like, look, this is the truth. This is what everyone is missing. And if that perception finds acceptance in a larger group, it automatically helps in sort of taking it on the internet.
How does one as an aspiring writer look or search for things that he might find an inclination with, especially in today's world where everything is digital and so much of information overload? So how do you filter it down? How do you find a niche? How do you narrow it down? What's the process? What's your process?
I just think that it's all accidental. Like, I don't think there is. So I just open YouTube and I just start browsing and I just randomly start clicking. So I think the information overload is, you just click and watch, and you don't know what video is going to help you. You don't know what video is not going to help you. So I think overtly segregating of things also is a problem, because then you will start reading and watching things that abide by only your school of thought, and that makes you a very boring person because you don't have diversity of opinion. Like, you should always watch things that you wouldn't otherwise watch. Right? That's the only way you learn. You might hate it, but you know why you hate it.
Coming back to your current thing, right? So what does All Things Small do right now? What are you up to? What's happening in the company right now?
So we are a media company that does non-fiction work, like non-fiction and true stories. So that is what we want to do. Like, that's what we want to create content in. And we create content in any kind of platform. So right now, specifically, we have a documentary film called Borderlands, which is doing well in the festival circuit. So that has been happening, which is directed by this very promising director, Samat Mahajan. So that is happening. Then we also have a podcast. We have 3-4 podcasts on Spotify, which is up and it's doing very well. Then we have, we're writing a bunch of Bibles and researching a bunch of stories. We are constantly looking for new content that is stories that haven't been told before, and we're just seeing how we can adapt it into various platforms, into various ways, into what medium is the best. So those are the things that we do on a daily basis.
What's been your relation with family like? Were they as I said, किसी ने पूछा नहीं कि इनकी सीट खराब कर दी. So what was your family's reaction when you said that I don't want to do this, but I want to get into writing? And what's your relation with them? And how does somebody solve this equation? And what's your advice to the kids, to the students who are watching this, if they want to pursue a career into the writing, but the family doesn't approve, or what's the fail-safe mechanism there? What would you advise?
See, I think, personally from my story, I feel, if I was very good at engineering, right? Like, if I had a crazy, if I had insane marks in engineering and I was doing incredibly well, and then I was giving that all up to do writing, then I think there would have been a lot more conversation. But I think I think my family knew right from year 2 that I wasn't doing well. So I don't think I had so much of a trouble convincing them that I need to join advertising. But it's a case-to-case basis. Like, I know of people who had a lot of problem back home. I think in the early 2008, 2010, during that time, because that's my batch. So I know there are people who had a lot of issues with their family because they wanted them to stick to their career and then sort of branch away and do something else. I feel that right now, my assumption is because of the opportunities and since when the media has opened up, that a lot more people around you who are not engineers and doctors who are doing well, right? Absolutely. And I think even parents can see that, and I think that sort of makes that case for your parents. So if you want to do something else, you can always sort of tell them, hey, look, there is this person who's doing well, and there is that person who is also doing well, who's not an engineer, who started their own company, and they're making a lot of money. So I think right now there is access to people who are doing things other than engineering. So I think one good way to convince your parents would be to show living examples of people around in your circle and tell them that, hey, look, this is possible. And I think that is one way to solve it. But it's a very unique case-to-case basis problem. And I think a lot of problems solve itself when you start doing decently well. But I think the problem is to get support till that point. And I think showing people around who are doing well to your parents might help in making this conversation a little better.
Absolutely. And also another big challenge that a lot of kids have is with money. So what's been your early relation with money? Of course, once you become established, you start making money. So give me two insights. One, what's been your relation with money as a intern or as a kid? And then how's this career in terms of money now, in terms of paying and stuff?
But, I mean, my relationship with money in the early years was very good because I didn't have money. So there was no relationship. There was not much relationship you can have with 8,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees a month. So there was not much money, and I think it gets better slightly with time, and but I think the money that you make in a creative field, it's more like an exponential rise. Like it's not a very steady, like, okay, you put in 3 years, you will earn this much, you put in 4 years, you will earn that much. So you can be 5 years, you can be working and you may not earn much, but then you do something in your 6th and 7th year and boom, you just like sort of skyrocket in terms of money. Or you can start off very well and then you don't do good work, and then you can also see like a fall in terms of your inquiries and people wanting to do work with you, people wanting to do projects with you, based on your work, the kind of person you are, what is your name in the market. So all those things can also bring your money down, right? So I think for me personally, in the like, I don't spend much. I think that really helps. Like, you know, I don't have interest in good clothes, good shoes. Like this is what I wore for your life. So I'm not the most well kept guy. So I don't go to a salon and spend $1,000 on my hair. So I am very frugal with my money. So I think it's easy for a person like me to pivot and do things, because I can just like be like, okay, I don't want to do this, let me take a risk and do something else, because I'm like, my lifestyle is here. So it's very hard to fall in terms of financially if you're not spending much, right? So so I think that really helps me, and I think that is good. And in terms of the money you make, it gets better, but also it's very uncertain. So if I'm making good money, it's not certain that I will make good money 2 years from now, right? Because while if you are in a normal job, your money keeps going up because the experience you're getting, and there's always like someone is going to take you for your experience. I think creative field is the only place where nobody takes you for your work experience, but they take you for your work. So you might be 10 years in the business, they will not give a shit if you have 10 years of work experience. But if you have 10 great pieces of work, your value goes up. So there is that also, because now I don't know if next year I will do good work or not. Like if my luck is bad, if I don't like crack good ideas, if things don't happen, which are not in my control, like I don't know if I will get a good gig 1.5 years later, right? So I think that is the big problem here, the uncertainty of how much you will be making, because you really can't plan your life according to that.
From the career point of view, is writing a stable career, considering you have good experience, you write well, you have a good skill set, you know right people, and you are consistent with the job? Is it a good and a stable career? How do you, in your opinion, what's the perspective around that?
Yeah, it is. It is a great career. I mean, which other career allows you to spend all day on YouTube and tell you're working? Like, I don't know too many careers that allow you to do that. So I feel career-wise, it is good. Like if you are doing good work, if you have a good mindset, and if you're willing to work really hard, it is a good career money-wise. But like I said, the only problem is the predictability of gigs and predictability of your own ability, and the insecurity of being irrelevant soon, are all factors that sort of make it tough to plan too much in advance. Like, 2 years later, like look at this, right? 2017, that's 3 years ago. Facebook was the shit. Like Facebook is where everyone was, and there were people who had pages with millions of followers on Facebook, killing it. And we're in 2020 and nobody goes to Facebook. So
Yes.
what happened to all those big Facebook pages who were dependent on Facebook for money? Right now, it's all on Instagram, and and if you hadn't gamed Instagram then, and if you haven't gamed Instagram, your livelihood is almost gone. So for me, like, my big stress is like, what is going to happen 3 years from now? Is there a new platform that emerges where or new forms of storytelling that becomes in vogue, where everyone is spending money which I cannot capitalize on because I missed the bus? Then, so there is that. That is the biggest risk as a writer, that at least a person that at least I feel I'm running.
If I have to ask you to rate, because you have been doing multiple stuff, you've been writing satire, you've been writing for print and digital media, you've been writing sketches, you've been into advertising. Can you for a quick reference grade them into kind of from easiest to difficult? If you have to kind of give us a parameter, what's the easiest to get into as an entry, and then what's the most difficult to write, which would need maximum experience and exposure?
See, I think it's a very interesting question, but I genuinely don't think there is an answer to this, because it depends. Like, see, the thing is, it's all different formats, right? So, like, it's like, I think the closest analogy I can think of is cricket. Like, you can be a test match player, but I mean, it's the same game, but it's T20. Like, how do you adapt and do this? So some people may find it easier here, some people may find it easier there. So it comes down to what interests you and where you have put maximum time into doing. Like, it's also about how much that particular industry has evolved. All right, because if there are not too many sketches happening, and you get into sketch writing at a time where there are not too many sketches happening, then your work gets more popular because there's not too much competition. But right now, if you go and do the things AIB was doing in 2015, there are 100 people who do that. And
absolutely,
it becomes very difficult to break out and make money over there. So it is a function of your interest, how mature the industry is, and how much time you have spent honing interest into that particular industry and field.
I have a last question where I want to kind of again take an insight from you, and then we have a few questions from the audience side. We'll pick them up. How do you think the writing industry is going to change? The creative professional in terms of writing is going to change. How it has impacted your industry, and what does the future look like?
I mean, see, the game obviously has changed, right? Because you're writing to constraint, because you cannot shoot. So you have to be smarter in how you kind of write stuff if you're writing stuff to get produced. But to be very honest, there is no answer to this question. At least I can't answer this question because it's still too early. We still don't know what is the impact on the industry. We still don't know, like, how long this is going to go on. Like, if this lockdown situation is going to go on for a longer time, we don't know how that is going to impact other companies in the industry. We don't know how that's going to impact execution in the industry. And then when the lockdown lifts and there is a vaccine and everything is normal, and then is there going to be a surplus of scripts and ideas that were developed during this time that goes into production? So then the demand kind of reduces. So we don't know that. But one thing we know right now is that content spike has been insane. People are consuming content because they are sitting at home and they have to do something. So there is demand for content, but there is a big execution issue for content.
Now we'll move to the rapid fire. I have a few questions where I want your insight, maybe a one-liner. So number one is, of course, why your company is called All Things Small.
I think it's like, to start anything big, you need to start with all things small.
Okay, fantastic. What's been your biggest achievement you think is still now?
In my career?
Yeah, or maybe life. Anything you would like to answer. Maybe you can tell both.
Making good friends.
Oh, okay. What's your biggest fear?
Becoming irrelevant.
Okay, that's too deep. What's your aspiration like currently? What's your dream work, dream job like?
Just keep creating. I think for me it's that. Just keep creating. Just keep writing.
What's that one big learning of your life that you want to share with the audience?
Wow, that's loaded. I think just changing every few years. Like, for me, I have learned saying yes to very different experiences. Um, it's been really nice saying yes to really different experiences, not knowing how things are going to go. Especially in terms of career, like I just have one rule, which is I don't want to ever make a boring mistake. Like I know there are going to be mistakes made, but
Mm-hmm.
the mistake doesn't have to be boring. Like, like for me after AIB, if I went to another comedy collective or another comedy job and then it didn't go well, then that's a very boring mistake, right? Like, fuck, you were in comedy and then you went somewhere and then you sucked at it again. Like, that's bad. But
Okay.
but just like doing something randomly completely different, and then if it all falls flat on your face, it's at least like, hey, this did something really wild that was not destined to succeed or do well. So it's yeah, never make a boring mistake.
Absolutely. Perfect. So now I'll pick up a few questions from the audience. What's been your influence in terms of writing?
I used to read the newspaper every day, like even as a kid. Help, my dad was a journalist, so we would get, I think, about 5-6 newspapers at home. And I never read comics. I never read so many books. I didn't watch Cartoon Network. I can't read fantasy. I can't watch Harry Potter. So I read only newspaper. So I know I used to read the newspaper back to back from the time I can remember. And so I know the politics of Karnataka politics in the 90s. I know every politician's name. I know what happened. I know things that are completely useless today. But I think just the curiosity for news and the curiosity for what was happening around the world that like sort of peaked while reading newspapers really helped me, is what I feel.
How to overcome writer's block?
So I think spoken about this before, but like I think the most important thing is to remember grammar and writing has nothing to do with writing. All right. So I think most of us get overwhelmed by the fact that, wow, I need to write this. I'm not getting the words. I don't know if I'm sounding right. I don't know. I just think writing is talking, and the grammar and the process of writing is just a medium of communication. I think the most important thing is the thought. So I think if you crack the thought, I don't think you should worry about grammar and spellings. So it doesn't matter. So I think you should just write like how you talk. And once you've written just whatever's there in your mind, which doesn't follow grammar or like the rules of the English language, and then you at least have the confidence that, hey, I've filled up a sheet, and then you kind of start editing it and try and make it sound as consumable as possible.
So what's your process of writing? How do you write? How do you come up with writing?
So I just like, for me, I don't write till I have thoughts on the subject. So I make sure I have a thought. I make sure I think about it. I make sure, okay, like, is this unique? Is this being said before? And if I have to say this thought, what is the nicest way to say it? Like, speak. And then I just go write it how I'll speak it. And then I will sit and edit it. But for me, the most important point is like to put that one page on the doc and then start moving words around. Once that one page is on the doc, you won't have writer's block.
Why writers aren't paid well? As in, I'm currently working with the job portal. They didn't even pay 10 paisa per word, PPW, as I don't have much experience. So yeah, what's your take on that?
See, because writing doesn't have like it's not a very regulated industry, right? There are no writing unions. There are no. It's a very nascent industry in India. It doesn't have any regulation, and anyone, see, the problem with writing is anyone can call themselves a writer. Like anyone with a word doc can write. So you're just competing with everyone, right? So so I think people don't value writing because everyone thinks they can write. Like if you work for a client, the client also thinks he knows how to write. I mean because you get that feeling, array, this is just words. I write SMSs, I write letters, I can write this also. Why do I need like a writer? But for example, if I was fixing your AC, or if I was fixing your software, you have no opinion on it because you have no clue about it. So you'll just take the word of the expert. And if the expert asks you money, you will pay because you're like, yeah, I don't know, it must be that expensive. But with writing, it's just so subjective that everyone feels they can write.
In general, what's in your opinion is the way to bill yourself or price yourself? How do you when do you know how much to charge? So what's that barometer of pricing? How do you do that?
I think there is no formula for this. I think the easiest, so like when you're starting out, one way could be like, what is your monthly salary? All right. Like you can sort of put like, okay, if I take up a writing job, this is what is my worth in the industry. If it is say 20,000-30,000 rupees a month. So then you sort of divide it by hour. All right. And you'll be like, okay, this is my hourly charge. And now when a writing job comes on your table, you're like, okay, this will take me 6 hours to do. So you multiply your hourly charge and you arrive at a price. I think that is one way to do it. But there are not there, because also the kind of writing that you do will have different levels of difficulty, different demands in the market. Maybe the kind of writing you do, not many people can do, so you can charge a little more.
Right.
But I think one way of arriving is just have a monthly charge, and then at least in the initial days, and then you slowly start pushing it, and then you see what, like if you are getting 10,000 rupees and you ask for 12,000, if you get 12,000, that's your new rate. And that's one way.
On that note, let's wrap, and let me first of all thank you, Devaiah, for joining us today. Let me wrap the session, and it was super fun, super insightful, and once again from everybody's side, from the entire audience side, thank you so much for joining us today on Cracking the Code.